Never heard of you. I said, I've heard of the CIA. Are you the CIA? We are the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation and we need to speak to you immediately. And then an agent's waiting for me outside, says my name, Zaky Mallah. This was like, whoa, this is Hollywood. This is what I want. And here it is, and this is where it begins.
A lonely teenager has finally got the attention he craves. But beyond Mallah's fantasy, fears are spreading that Australian-born terrorists could threaten the nation. As wild suspicion spreads, the Lebanese community feels under attack. As the war on terror rages, Australian-born Zaky Mallah is depressed and stacking shelves in the local supermarket. But to the intelligence services, he's a potential terrorist.
I was dumb, stupid, uneducated. I was a fool, rebellious. I'm sitting in there and all these questions. What's your view about 9/11? What's your view about Osama bin Laden? Do you support terrorism? Are you thinking of participating in violence? I said, no, I will not participate. But on the other hand, if jihad is declared, then I'll have to take part.
As one teenager enjoys his 15 minutes of fame, the Lebanese community feel the brunt of new anti-terrorist laws.
As part of the war on terror, at home, Australia enacts something like 14 different pieces of legislation which are geared towards increasing the power of government to prevent and control terrorist organisations and terrorist acts.
We were quite afraid of the implication of such laws on our daily living. We also were afraid that our young people who might have been influenced one way or the other, they may say the wrong thing, they may do the wrong thing, or even they may think the wrong thing.
I accept that there is a feeling in the community that thoughts were going to be punished, but that's not the reality. We cannot arrest and charge people for thinking something but not acting on it in any way. We have to have solid acts committed by people before we would act in terms of charging them for criminal offences.
But the new laws make the community feel as if they're being targeted.
We suffered a great deal. We could not trust that this new legislation will be enacted properly. They rushed them through.
The security services were in fact identifying small numbers of people who were thinking about planning terrorist attacks, but the scale of that behaviour and the scale of the response were totally different. So the atmosphere becomes much more paranoid, not simply amongst government, but also amongst the community.
On the streets of southwest Sydney, at the start of the Second Gulf War, the Lebanese Australian community is increasingly accused of being sympathetic to terrorism.
After the 9/11 situation, I think it was probably 3 years after that, I had a situation where a couple of undercover police rocked up at my workplace and they said, we need to speak to you.
After growing up in Punchbowl, Sal El-Khair is a proud Lebanese Australian, now working in management.
So we sat inside and apparently somebody suggested that I was a supporter of terrorism, I funded terrorism. My first reaction was to laugh because, yeah, I was very outspoken about, I guess, the war and against Iraq and so on. And I did call the radio many times to profess that. But yeah, so somebody apparently had made the complaint and they came out to investigate, but I thought it was laughable.
The new legal powers and increased police activity inevitably target Zaky Mallah.
The Australian Federal Police knocked on my door and they gave me a piece of paper from the Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer, who said, "We have formed the opinion that you are likely to engage in conduct that might prejudice the security of Australia or of a foreign country." And I read that. I still didn't even know what it meant.
Mallah's passport is withheld because the authorities believe he could seek terrorist training in the Middle East. And the federal government seizes the opportunity to promote its anti-terrorist credentials in the media.
It came to the point where every time I'd walk out onto the streets, people would come to me and say, "You are the terrorist, you're the jihadist, you're the fundamentalist, you're the extremist. Go back home, you wog, we don't want you here." Where do you want me to go? I was born here, this is my country, this is all I know.
Isolated and increasingly paranoid, Zaky Mallah is getting attention beyond his dreams. But now his jihad fantasy is starting to scare him.
I had a death threat, a death letter on my door saying, "Jesus Christ is your Lord, is your God. Get out of this country, go back home." I purchased a gun. There was no one there to look after me. And within 24 hours, the New South Wales counter-terrorism unit raided my house and charged me for possession of a illegal firearm.
Then Zaky makes the biggest mistake of his life.
I thought, well, what the heck? I might as well go all out and make a video and target ASIO and threaten them. I, Zaky Mallah, have been oppressed and have been wronged. And I have made the decision to help and defend myself in whatever way I see necessary. In the video, when you listen to it, it makes clear threats that if you don't give me back my passport, I'm going to take you hostage, I'm going to kill you, etc., etc. Words of threat.
Out of a job and running out of money, he tries to sell the video to an ASIO agent posing as a journalist.
I took the $3,000 off him on that afternoon in Condell Park, and he said, "I don't know whether to wish you, good luck or goodbye." In other words, I don't know whether I'll be seeing you again or this video's gonna get you shot. Not a second later, police cars everywhere. You are under arrest for planning a terrorist attack in Sydney. Whoa.
The man's been charged under recent Commonwealth legislation with acts in preparation for a terrorist act.
Zaky is locked up in Goulburn Maximum Security Jail awaiting trial, charged with 2 counts of planning an act of terrorism.
I thought this was all a dream, that what is happening with me right now, being placed in orange overalls, shackled, padlocked, handcuffed, with a MIN number attached to me, sitting in a maximum security cell. This is a movie. I was going to wake up sometime soon.
All this legislation that they have passed, that they wanted to show it's applicable somehow, and they applied on this poor man. He needed a psychologist, he needed a counselor, he did not need to go to prison.
I accept there is some feeling in some sections of the community that he simply wasn't a realistic threat. We're not a social work organisation. The police are there to enforce the law. He'd clearly, very clearly broken the law, and the courts felt the same way.
As Zaky Mallah awaits his trial, tensions are starting to rise in a Sydney suburb. The fight over what it means to be Australian will eventually explode into one of the most violent race riots in the nation's history.
The jury had to decide, were these the words of a terrorist in waiting?
I, Zaky Mallah, have been oppressed and have been wronged.
Or a man just desperate for media attention?
Zaky Mallah is the first Australian in history to be charged under the new counter-terrorist laws with planning acts of terrorism. If found guilty, he faces 2 life sentences.
Mallah's activities, which are essentially ego-boosting bravado rather than anything else, provide an opportunity to put the whole structure of criminal law into action.
They needed to test their power. They needed to test the new amendment and legislations.
I don't accept that anybody in the police, in the Zaky Mallah case or any other case for that matter, said, let's arrest and charge someone just to test the law.
After 1 year and 9 months in maximum security, Zaky is acquitted of the terrorist charges, but pleads guilty to threatening ASIO officers. He's sentenced to 2.5 years.
So yes, I was guilty to threatening to kill ASIO officers, only because they took my passport. I had no one to turn to. I had no guidance in life. So it was my words of threat that got me into this whole situation in the first place. They should have looked at me as someone who was troubled, but no, they treated me as a terrorist.
For all of his short life, Zaky has felt like he didn't belong in the country of his birth.
I, for the first time, interacted with Islander Australians, white Caucasian Australians, Asian Australians, Aboriginal Australians. It wasn't just my kind. So, funny enough to say, it was Goulburn that made me understand that, yes, I was Australian. I actually thank them for this turnaround in life by sending me to Goulburn and understanding things from a different perspective.
Zaky never loses his taste for publicity and uses TV and social media to record visits to the rebel frontline in the Syrian civil war. After 9/11, fears over Arab-Australian terrorism continue to threaten the harmonious ideals of multiculturalism. And here in this iconic Aussie setting, racism is set to explode.
Cronulla is the only beach in Sydney which is on a railway line. It is historically the beach that the West goes to. Migrants of all backgrounds who are on that Western line have gone to Cronulla as their beach. The surf beach is where the Aussies go, the Anglo-Australians go. It's the beach where Puberty Blues was set. It's a place of iconic Australian teenagehood going back generations.
For decades, two worlds have shared one stretch of coastline in a country they all call home.
Cronulla was like home on the weekends as a kid during summer. It was as if Bankstown or Punchbowl had migrated to the park.
Growing up in Lakemba, Mohammed Kaboutli thinks of Cronulla as his summer backyard.
It was full of Arabs and it was full of Lebanese drums and barbecues and hubbly-bubblies, argiles as we call them. Full of all the weird and wonderful things that was normal to us, and it was great because it was safety, it was home, and it was fun. It was fun as a kid.
كنا ناخذ العائلة على كرنالله، رايحين نروح على سان سوزي، نضيع وقتنا وقتهم. بس يوم الأحد.